Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and
I'm Joe.
We talk about a lot of weird stuff, as I always say, and quite frequently, at some point, I accuse the people who believe in the weird stuff of being stupid, and you roll your eyes at me as if I shouldn't say that. And so there's another option. Maybe they're crazy.
Check all that out.
Why do people believe weird stuff? Maybe they believe it because they aren't well informed. Maybe they aren't capable of being well informed. Maybe they have a mental illness. My question for you today, Joe, is when is it okay to involuntarily lock somebody up for an issue like a mental illness problem, or, you know, as RFK, who is now in charge of the world or the country's health, has said he wants to make health farms where people would go and presumably get better from their mental health issue or their obesity or their other issues. So when is it okay to take somebody who's living on their own and put them someplace where they cannot freely walk out the door and be back on their own? When is that okay? So generally they say when someone is a danger to themselves or others, but you could say somebody who eats hamburgers 3 times a day is a danger to themselves. You know, that's a broad brushstroke. You could say somebody who believes they're talking to Santa Claus and they're walking down the street having a conversation with Santa Claus, and maybe they're so involved in it they don't see cars driving by them. Are they a danger to themselves and others? Are they thinking about possibly taking drugs to the point where they don't wake up? Should that person be institutionalized?
Well, so in our country, at least for right now, we have a mechanism essentially for deciding how that works. There's no universal law that determines whether somebody should be locked up or whether you have the right to go and protest on the sidewalk, or whether you have the right to go and buy pork. There is no universal law, and there never will be. But people decide those things, and our system has it that we elect people to go and represent us. And presumably, if the system worked, if it functioned, which it doesn't, but if it functioned correctly, our representative would be the best match for what we want out of how our system works. So they would agree with us that you can't go and murder people or whatever. If, however, most people think it's completely fine to go and hold women against their will, like if they're your wife or whatever, which is, as far as I understand, in some places completely legal. Mm-hmm. If that's what everyone wants, or if the average, in the case of plurality voting, then that's what we'll get. We'll get a representative who goes and makes those laws in particular, or at least encourages those laws. In terms of like universally, what's the best way of deciding on a personal level whether it's okay to lock somebody up? There's always a case where someone will, no matter who it is, will agree that, yeah, it's definitely a good idea to lock that person up.
Like criminals and stuff.
Well, beyond that, I mean, even if you think, for instance, let's say it is not in any case illegal, there's no case where we would ever put anybody in prison or ever kill, procedurally kill somebody for being a danger to society or anything like that. Okay. No person goes to prison. No person's right to move around or do anything is ever infringed. Let's say, and every person is really, really hard on that. They will not compromise. And then you have a person born who really wants to kill people. And they sadistically, procedurally go and murder millions of people. So let's say they already killed 100 million people via poison or something. And they're going to go and kill 100 million more. Mm-hmm. You have a very, very strong incentive to stop them
Yes.
You can take it to any extreme. Let's say this person is an intergalactic menace and they're going to kill 100 quadrillion people. At some point, you will say, yeah, take them out, or lock them up. Everyone has a limit to where they will switch over from no, don't lock them up, to yes, lock them up. If somebody is 100% guaranteed to be going, like in an hour, they're going to commit suicide. And I mean, in our system, let's say, your neighbor, 100%, they're going to commit suicide in 1 hour. And if you went over there and you physically held them down, they wouldn't do it. Then obviously, if you don't want them to commit suicide, you go and physically hold them down. That's illegal. You can't do that. But you would prevent them from committing suicide.
Okay, so let's take the criminality out of this. What made me think of this specifically was RFK talking about these wellness camps. Mm-hmm. And so he's talking about people with mental illness, people who are on SSRIs, people who are obese, people who have other health challenges that require medication. And he wants to put them into labor camps that he calls wellness farms, where they don't give them their prescription medicines, and they don't have cell phones or computers, so they can't contact anybody outside, and they work full time growing organic food, and he says it will reparent them and make them be better. They'll get well. That to me is like a concentration camp. That's what that sounds like.
So obviously there's two different questions here. One, is it okay to hold people in concentration camps? And two, is it okay to hold people against their will?
So I think it's the same thing, because it's just the definition of why would you need to remove them from society? And he's saying he's doing it for their own good, and that's why you would involuntarily commit somebody to an institution who had a mental health challenge for their own good, correct? Or the good of society. So, in the case of somebody who's going to kill 100 million people, you'd remove them from society.
Yeah, okay. So imagine you have the person who's going to kill 100 million people, and you say, okay, we have to lock them up. And you hand that person over to a guy who puts them into a room and locks the door. It's not exactly the same as somebody who you really trust to hold them. You know what I mean?
That's true.
So in this case, whether or not this is realistic or not, whether it comes to pass, I highly doubt it.
Yeah, well,
and I don't know about the specifics. I haven't heard about it. But if they made health concentration camps, whatever, that's a terrible idea. It probably would have terrible outcomes. It would, in order for me to trust it, it would have to provide some evidence that this is the best course. So it's another issue on top of whether you hold them, how you hold them.
I think what it did in my brain is it sparked this. Okay, well, if he's saying that obese people can be fixed through wholesome living on this wellness farm, and people who have depression or ADHD or autism or whatever, and then I looked at the criteria for how you institutionalize someone against their will, and it's, are they a danger to themselves or others? Can they not take care of their daily needs? Okay, so if somebody is homeless, do you institutionalize them? Well, that might be a really fine thing for them to be able to have a home.
Again,
maybe they don't want to.
It's up to every individual person to decide that.
Yeah.
And the average, well, not the average in our system, but theoretically, when most people agree on something, that's what we do as a society,
Mm-hmm.
As a government. But again, if you think like, oh, we can construct a model that will tell us whether or not it's a good idea to or what point we should lock people up or whatever. There are models.
Mm-hmm.
You like for instance, the easiest one is you look at how much it will cost people if you do versus if you don't do X thing. Like, okay, homeless people, if you lock them up versus if you don't lock them up.
Right.
What are the monetary consequences of that? As far as I know, locking people up would be more... this is very vague, my understanding. But if you lock them up, like in jails, that's more expensive.
Yeah.
But if you simply provide housing,
Yeah.
that's
Less
expensive than the do nothing case.
Yeah.
So that's over time, it's a far better idea to just provide mass housing, like no questions asked, no income, mass housing. Is that you pay actually less?
Yes.
It'd be like someone gave you $10 million or whatever over a decade.
Because it costs so much to manage the unhoused population.
Yeah.
So here's another thought. Let's just say that did come to pass, and they were going to take people with a diagnosis and put them at a health camp or a wellness farm or whatever he's calling it. ADHD, that's a mental health diagnosis. Anxiety, what else? Autism, anywhere on the spectrum of autism, and there are lots of people that are functioning quite well and they have a diagnosis of autism of some sort, of some level. You could go on and on and on of just mental health issues, nervousness, who knows. And then you get into other things that your behavior may be contributing to health issues, obesity.
So,
it goes on and on and on.
As I was saying, there's a continuum and every person has like some threshold where they go past and say, now we'll do the thing. If you had a theoretical dictatorship where people are locked up based on their health, whatever, the threshold of being literally any diagnosis is probably objectively terrible. That's not a good threshold.
No, I agree.
That would be if you took the whole spectrum from absolutely no diagnosis to you have to diagnose them very, very hardly, like strictly a lot of confounding evidence,
detailed
whatever
criteria,
and it's just like 1% on that line. That's not a good threshold.
No,
that would be 95% of people or whatever.
Okay, yes, exactly. That is my point. It would be almost everybody.
Again, it's those kind of things give me evidence that's the whole concept is absurd.
It's absurd.
I mean, I would even go so far as to say, like, the news that you heard it on was they didn't hear it correctly.
Well, it came out of his mouth, absurd. RFK's mouth. It came out of his mouth, and then it was reported on.
This is what I mean. It's like, okay, someone says something, and they didn't really explain themselves very well, and then people take it, and they report on it, and they're reading between the lines.
I think he absolutely believes that. I think he's a nutcase.
Maybe, but my point is that you need a lot of evidence to be very confident about something.
So here's my conspiracy theory. What if, think back to during the pandemic, and Trump said, well, if they just quit testing, the numbers would go down. So now we've got a situation where they're cutting off health care benefits to people and threatening to put people with diagnoses in, basically incarcerate them, institutionalize them. So if people can't go to the doctor and get a diagnosis, and they don't want to get a diagnosis even if they have the money, guess what happens? There's less mentally ill people. There's less people with diagnoses because they're not being diagnosed. And then Trump can say, look, we cured it.
Possibly. It's possible that this administration thinks that. But I'll say one thing I said before. It's fairly clear to me that you have, in any position of power, a value, like a points, and you can spend them on whatever you want. But each thing you do costs so many points. And if it goes negative, then you don't have any points to do anything else. And if it goes too negative, people will respond very strongly, up and past the point of just flat out killing you. There's, I'm thinking, for instance, of, I think it was Libya in 15 years, I don't know, so it's like 15 years ago now, something like that, where they literally pulled I think it was their king, out of his palace and bludgeoned him to death. I mean, these things do happen. If you don't give your people something back, meaning, gaining social capital from them, then bad stuff will happen to you, no matter who you are. And it becomes increasingly difficult to do those sorts of things. Do the things you want as a dictator or whatever. If you don't have your bread in circuses. In this case, if you take away social benefits, you almost certainly will completely undermine the base of people supporting you. Like, no matter who you are. If you take away any benefits, you'll start degrading that. If you take away benefits like healthcare, as we've seen in the past, few months, that people respond to that extremely negatively, up to the point I can't emphasize how close we were for there being a lot more Luigis around, whatever it was, 2 months ago or whatever.
I'm not discounting that there's not going to be more.
If you start messing with people's healthcare specifically, you're really riding the line between people setting up, and I'm talking literally, those things, what are they called? They cut your head off?
Guillotines?
Guillotines. Because that's the meme.
Off with his head.
You're really on the fucking line if you start messing with healthcare.
You were very, very close. Muammar Mohammed Abu Minyar al-Gaddafi.
Gaddafi, yeah.
Died in 2011, 14 years ago. You said 15 years ago. And he was assassinated by the rebel forces of the National Liberation Army.
Was he a king or president?
He was...
I think he was some kind of executive.
He was king.
Okay.
No, wait a minute. I don't know if he was a king.
I remember it was like social media. I think it was like fueled by the rise of social media.
Yeah, he was definitely
People were organizing on social media, if I remember right, and there was them like attacking him in the streets, pulling him out and whatever. There were lots of videos and images of that. It was amazing because it seemed like at the time, oh wow, this is like paradigm shifting. People are organizing on social media and then they're doing this ostensibly good thing.
Yeah.
It didn't turn out like that, obviously.
No, it did not. Truly Terrified is a Salt of the Earth production. Our contact information is in the show notes. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.
Run from the mob.
Run.